Hey everyone, welcome to this edition of History with Sai. On this channel, we have covered a lot of Babylonian history. We started around the year 2000 BCE, the beginning of the Old Babylonian period, and discussed the powerful dynasties of Isin and Larsa. We then went deep into the history of the first dynasty of Babylon, from its founder, Sumuabum, to its most famous king, Hammurabi, and up to its end at the hands of the Hittite king, Mushili I. After a brief period of political chaos, a new dynasty, the Kassite, came to power. They ruled over and protected Babylonia for over 400 years until their eventual demise at the hands of the Elamites, who in 1155 BCE not only sacked the city of Babylon, but plundered its holiest temple, the Isagil, and carried off the great statue of the god Marduk that was housed within it. We've covered over 800 years of Babylonian history. So, let's move on. After this most recent fall of Babylon, the Elamites occupied parts of southern Mesopotamia. Like several times in the past, their presence there wasn't a long-term one, and eventually a new local dynasty took over, though how they came to power isn't well understood. In one of the Babylonian king lists, they're called Pale Ishin, meaning Dynasty of Isin. We call them the second dynasty of Isin so that we don't confuse it with the first dynasty of the same name. If you want to learn more about them, check out the video Isin, Larsa, and the beginnings of the Old Babylonian period. Why they're called Pale Ishin in the king list isn't known, because as of now, we have no evidence or even a claim from any of their kings that they were recognized as rulers of that city. Perhaps they may have originally been from Isin before transferring their seat of power to Babylonia's historical capital of Babylon, which in the eyes of many would have given them a greater sense of legitimacy over other noble houses in the region. Whereas Babylon's preceding dynasties were of Amorite or Kassite origin, the second dynasty of Isin is the first truly native Babylonian dynasty, and the names of all of its kings are pure Akkadian. The texts that we've uncovered so far indicate little of note about the first few kings of the second dynasty of Isin, with the exception of the fourth, Nebuchadnezzar, also pronounced Nabuchadnezzar. Now, this is a different Nebuchadnezzar than the rather infamous one that appears in the Bible, who was the Babylonian king who conquered Jerusalem and brought a good deal of its surviving population to Babylon as slaves. He's also credited with building the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon. That king was Nebuchadnezzar II, who would come about 500 years later and has no relationship to the Nebuchadnezzar that we're talking about in this program. The precise year of Nebuchadnezzar's ascension to the throne of Babylon is a much contested topic amongst the scholarly community. The most recent revision states that he became king in the year 1121 BCE, possibly usurping the throne from his father, though the chronicle that this reading is interpreted from is incomplete and missing a few key details. What we do know is that Nebuchadnezzar's father, Ninurta-Nadim Shumi, had gone to war with Assyria, or at least was supporting rebels in the city of Arbel, which today is modern Erbil. Not surprisingly, his son Nebuchadnezzar also fought several times against Assyria. An Assyrian chronicle called the Synchronistic History states, Nebuchadnezzar took his siege engines and went to conquer Zanku, a fortress in Assyria. Ashur-Reshaishi, king of Assyria, mustered his chariots to go against him. To prevent the siege engines being taken from him, Nebuchadnezzar burnt them. He turned and went home. This same Nebuchadnezzar, with chariots and infantry, went to conquer Idu, a fortress of Assyria. Ashur-Reshaishi sent chariots and infantry to help the fortress. He fought with Nebuchadnezzar, brought about his total defeat, slaughtered his troops, and carried off his camp. One has to remember that the synchronistic history is an Assyrian document and may have been exaggerated at certain points. We do know that in the end, the two sides made peace, with Nebuchadnezzar going on a state visit to the Assyrian capital of Ashur. However, what Nebuchadnezzar is really known for is his campaign against Elam to return the holy statue of Marduk, which had been plundered from the Isagil temple a few decades prior by the Elamite king, Kutir-Nahunte. Such idols were considered to have been earthly manifestations of the deity, and so the statue of Marduk being in Elam to the pious Babylonian meant that the god currently resided there and not in his true sanctuary, the Isagil. A copy of a literary document found in the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal's great library of Nineveh recalls Nebuchadnezzar's anger, frustration, and sadness at the loss of Marduk. In Babylon dwells Nebuchadnezzar, the king. He rages like a lion and thunders like the god Adad. Like a lion, he frightens his distinguished nobles. His supplications go to the god Marduk, lord of Babylon. Have pity on me, one who is dejected and prostrate. Have pity on my land, which weeps and mourns. Have pity on my people, who wail and weep. O Lord of Babylon, how long will you dwell in the land of the enemy? May beautiful Babylon be remembered by you. Turn your face back to Isagil, which you love. And so, Nebuchadnezzar left Babylon with a sizable army and marched to the fortress city of Der, one of Mesopotamia's main gateways into Elam. The Babylonian army reached the river Ulai, where it clashed with the army of Hutelidish in Shushinak, the king of Elam, who was based in Susa. I think though that you may benefit from hearing a description of the battle from someone who was actually there. One description of the event comes from a Kassite chariot officer of Nebuchadnezzar named Shiti Marduk, who claims that he had a decisive role in the battle. Though I'm reading only sections of it, which are a bit long and filled with hyperbole, I think that it's a fascinating text and worth taking a closer look at. When Nebuchadnezzar, the reverend prince, the finest, the offspring of Babylon, the preeminent of kings, the regent of Babylon, the son of his land, who makes his people flourish, who protects the borders, the righteous king who renders just verdicts, whose might is always devoted to waging war, who bears a furious bow, who does not fear war, the finest of kings, the prince, the beloved of Marduk. When Marduk, king of the gods, ordered him to avenge Akkad, he raised his weapons. From Der, the sanctuary of An, he launched an attack 30 leagues deep. The radiant heat burned like fire, and it was as if the roads were blazing like flames. There was no water in the watering pastures, and the watering places were cut off. The very finest of the horses stood still, while the legs of the heroic soldier buckled. Shiti Marduk, lord of the house of Bid-Karziabku, whose chariot was the right flank of the king, his lord, did not delay, and he kept control of his chariot. The potent king sped, and he reached the bank of the Ulai River. The kings met, and they both waged war. Fire ignited between them. The sun's face was obscured by their dust. Shiti Marduk, lord of the house of Bid-Karziabku, whose chariot was on the right flank of the king, his lord, did not delay and kept control of his chariot. He did not fear combat, and he descended on the enemy. Into his lord's enemy positions he penetrated deeply. By the command of the goddess Ishtar and the god Adad, the lords of combat, routed Hultulidish, the king of Elam. He disappeared. So the king, Nebuchadnezzar, stood triumphantly. He seized Elam and looted its property. Though not specifically mentioned here, another document more or less gives the same concise description of the event with one added detail. The Lord, Bel-Marduk, returned to his home in Babylon, which is essentially a reference to Nebuchadnezzar bringing his holy statue back from Elam and putting it in its rightful place in the Isagil. For this great deed, Nebuchadnezzar was remembered by the Babylonians for centuries afterwards as a great national hero. Despite this, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't an all-powerful king. It's likely that he presided over a sort of confederacy where he had to share his authority with local officials, especially Kassite tribal leaders. The deeds of the other 7 kings of the second dynasty of Isin paled in comparison to Nebuchadnezzar, and history hasn't recorded too much about them. We do know that wars with Assyria flared up once again, the most notable being with Tiglath-Pileser I, one of the most powerful Assyrian kings in history. He claims to have had a decisive victory against the Babylonian king, Marduk-Nadin-Ahi. I captured the palaces of Babylon, which belonged to Marduk-Nadin-Ahi, king of Karduniash, and burnt them. I drew up a battle line of chariots against Marduk-Nadin-Ahi, king of Karduniash, and defeated him. Marduk-Nadin-Ahi, though, managed to escape, and eventually was able to reclaim the throne of Babylon. Tiglath-Pileser never was able to consolidate his gains against Babylon because of other threats Assyria faced to the west. Despite such wars, Marduk-Nadin-Ahi's son, Marduk-Shapik-Ziri, made peace with Assyria, probably because the two sides faced an overall more dangerous common threat, the Aramaeans. How the second dynasty of Isin ended isn't known. It's believed though that northern and central Babylonia, of which the city of Babylon was part of, may have been overrun by Aramaeans, allowing the rulers in the southern part known as the Sealand to grab power. It's a fairly obscure period, and one that I'll get into in another video on Babylonian history. Stay tuned. As always, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. If you learned something or simply just enjoyed the video, please don't hesitate to hit that like button because it really helps the channel out a lot. Also, check out the History with Sai podcast where I go into more detail with regard to some of the topics discussed on the channel. You can also follow History with Sai on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Take care and stay safe.